in. But I'm absolutely delighted to welcome precious Sithole this evening, who is going to talk about her organisation Beyond Suffrage, and also tell us a little bit about mentorship, because many of you have said in the past that you want a mentor, or we've articulated to you about getting a mentor, but haven't really gone into the sort of detail about what that actually means and looks like and feels like. So, Precious, if I can hand over straight to you for an introduction to yourself and mentorship, please.
Thanks, Leon. Hi, everyone. As Leon mentioned, I am Precious. I am the founder CEO of Social Practice ENT, and one of the programs that we run for our organisations is Beyond Suffrage. So we also have a mentorship scheme that we'll be running for our young trustees that we train through the programme. So I can tell you a bit more about mentorship through my experience. So when we talk about mentorship, we are effectively referring to a relationship between two individuals. So you can sort of go down a formal route or an informal route. So if we're talking about formal mentorship, that's where you've got your mentor and you've got your mentee. So you can have a training program where the two are matched, and then you can have your targets that are set. You can meet a set number of times. You can get feedback as to how you're performing. That tends to be the traditional route when it comes to sort of your mentoring programs. But then you can have a more informal, light touch mentoring approach. And that's where you are, for example, in a position where you can approach someone and you can effectively ask them informally to be your mentor and go out for coffee. They can then support you with whatever targets you've got. But that tends to be a little less structured and far more, I guess you can say, light touch, like I mentioned.
And if you were to try and define a mentor, and I know you sort of started to delve into it there, how would you define it to somebody that is completely new to the boardroom? Because in this movement, we have some people who are, just turned 18 and aspiring trustees and might be completely unaware of mentoring. If you were to just try and define it in a sentence or two, what would you say?
So your traditional mentor would be someone who supports you with whatever goals that you've got set for yourself. So that's almost like your sounding board, the person that you would go to with your queries, whatever concerns you have, that person would effectively support you with that.
And if I am a new trustee, so I've just been appointed to a board, and I want a mentor to learn, how do I go about starting that conversation? Where do I look? Who do I go to?
So I'd always recommend starting within your sphere. So you've just joined the board, find the person that you connect with the most. You can then approach them and ask them if it's okay to have coffees before your board meetings. So that will be something that's a little less formal. But the good thing about it is when people are really busy, sometimes the title of being asked to be a mentor might be a bit too much for them to commit to. However, most people can commit to coffee. So if you could ask them to, if you can do coffee before board meetings, chances are they'll say yes. And then if you need a bit more structured support, you can always ask them, are you able to be my mentor formally? Which they could say yes to, or they could say no. But even if they say no, they might know someone within their network who would be able to support you and be your mentor. So just be bold and don't be afraid to ask.
And for those that have watched this, a couple of these episodes before, will know that what we tend to say is the worst thing that people can do is say no or ignore you. They're not going to ignore you, though, if they have to serve with you on a board, because there's something here, isn't there, about you've been appointed to the board, you're a trustee, you're now working with your peer group, as opposed to a more hierarchical structure. I guess I've always found that quite difficult to balance my thinking with, because I was 18 when I first became a trustee with all these, Danes, sirs and all the rest of it. And I was just a brand new university student. And I didn't even have a day job at the time. So I guess it's about that reversing your thinking on your head. Do you have any advice for people that might be struggling with that? I guess it's sort of imposter syndrome, really.
Yeah, imposter syndrome never really goes away though. And you just have to almost lean into it. I still get imposter syndrome. I walk into rooms and I feel like I probably shouldn't be there. And it's just one of those things that you've got to embrace your vulnerability and really understand that you've got something to bring to the table. So just because you're young doesn't mean that you haven't got something to contribute. You know the world through a completely different lens. compared to the other board members. So you bring in something that's special, something that's completely different. So if you try and mimic the other board members, you're probably not going to be that great a version of them. Just embrace the fact that you are a young trustee. You are there as almost like a representative of young people. So the youth voice, you've got something to bring, and then lean into that. Don't feel the need or the pressure to be anything other than yourself.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So how do, if, you know, I don't, or no one wants to be the only person in the room to ask the question of, you know, why, or I don't get it, or I don't know what I'm doing. So asking for a mentor, some people might think exposes them as being less knowledgeable or less skilled or less able. How do I go about, or how do people watching this go about getting themselves in the right frame of mind for thinking, actually, a mentorship's the right thing to do, rather than this is me saying I need help?
Yeah, so it always circles back to that whole concept of embracing vulnerability. Just have the conversation starting with yourself. You need to convince yourself before you can convince anyone else. And a lot of the issues that we face tend to be in our heads. So you will be thinking that people are sort of looking at you and thinking, well, this individual needs support, when no one's really thinking that. A lot of it tends to be internal. So it could just be that you need to have a conversation with yourself and just talk yourself up to really feel confident in your role. But then the second thing that you could really do is try and circle out people who are supportive within the board structure, and then have a side conversation with them. So that way you don't have to worry about speaking to the entire board about needing support. You just speak to one person or two people, and then you can sort of take it from there. Confidence is just one of those things that you just have to keep working at and building it over time. And you just have to keep falling and getting up, and falling and getting up, and just appreciate that it doesn't get much easier.
And trusteeship, I guess, can turbocharge you getting that confidence, right? And feeling more appropriately at place, and better in your job, and better as a non-exec, and all the rest of it. So I guess I would like what you're saying there around, actually, if you're having a conversation with someone about grabbing a coffee before a board meeting, no one else needs to know that that conversation has happened, or that that meeting has happened. So you can embark on your mentoring or mentorship journey pretty discreetly, I suppose, which is a really good point. What would you say then are the key benefits to having a mentor and to having a mentee? Because so far we're talking about receiving mentorship rather than necessarily having a mentee and the impact that that can have. What would you say the benefits to both parties?
So if you've got a mentor, you've got someone who can really support you. You've got someone in your corner, first and foremost, but then you've got someone who you can ask all your questions that you're not comfortable asking the whole group, which is something that we all need. We need someone who we can ask all our silly questions, have a sound check, and then effectively you can be a bit more confident to bring them to the entire board if it's something that you're worrying about. But then you also have someone who can help you to develop. We all need feedback. We need someone who can hold us to account. If you've got any goals that you've set for yourself, you need someone who will ask you, how are you getting on with A, B, C, D, E? So that's a really good thing from the mentee's perspective. But in terms of the mentor, you have the ability to sort of pour into someone else, and we cannot underestimate the how much you gain from that. So by having a mentee, you can give back in a way that was given to you, but also you've got a lot to learn. I've got mentees and I learn a lot from them. So I don't see mentorship as a one-way relationship where you're learning in one direction. It's almost like a two-way relationship, and both will learn from each other. So I've got mentees and I've got a formal mentor, and I'm always learning.
I think as well, like from what you're saying, it sounds like there's a delicacy there around offering to mentor, so that the mentee doesn't feel like all the things that we've just spoken about, I suppose. Because if someone, how nice would it be if you joined a board and another trustee automatically, as just part of the sort of induction process or whatever, just said, let's grab a coffee, I'm your board buddy, which is a mentorship style relationship without necessarily calling it that. What would you say then to some people that are watching this who are a couple of years into their trustee career? Would you encourage them to do that and to offer to be a mentor, or should you wait for the potential mentee to ask you? Because you don't want to sound patronizing at the same time as wanting to make sure you're just there if someone needs extra support.
I don't think there's anything wrong with putting yourself out as a mentor and saying that if you need any support, I'm here. Again, we don't need the titles. The titles aren't always necessary. They can come later. But if someone joins your board who's younger or new, you can always ask them to coffee as well. So it sort of works both ways. There's nothing wrong with that. It only becomes an issue when it's forced. You want it to always be an organic relationship where both people sort of gel and they can have that good relationship, because then you can open up and really share your problems.
Yeah. And do you have any tips on concretely how you do this? So how do you approach somebody and ask them even for a coffee if you're, like I say, 18 years old, brand new into the boardroom with all of the grandeur that comes with trustees and all the rest of it? How do you do it? How would you do it? How have you done it?
Connecting on social media. Social media tends to be a bit lighter, isn't it, compared to the boardroom? So you can always find them on LinkedIn. If they're on Twitter, even better. And then just slide in their DMs, just send them a nice message and invite them out to coffee. Most people would not say no, especially if it's sort of lined up with the board meeting. So you always want to be aware and conscious of the fact that sometimes people are just busy. It's not that they don't want to do it. They might be overcommitted. However, if you make it as easy as possible and you sort of saying, can we meet just before the board meeting? It makes it really hard for them to say no.
And yeah, I think that's right. And actually the charities, typically, most trustees are pretty willing, right? They're volunteering their time, they believe in the cause, they tend to sort of understand the role of mentorship, etc. So perhaps we've already won the hearts and minds of these people. But I want to talk about privilege a bit. And in our conversation that we had before this call, we briefly mentioned it. But first of all, do different forms of privilege play a part when it comes to trying to secure mentorship? So will a young woman struggle to find mentorship in a board where it's generally men? How does that dynamic play out?
Privilege will always be a major player when it comes to things like this. The first thing that comes to mind is class privilege, because if you've got, if you're coming from a upper middle class background, chances are you already have people in your network from your family, people who can connect you. So you don't really need that connection within the board because you may already know trustees. Whereas if you're coming from a working class background, we've come across young people who've never heard of trusteeship before. So there's automatically that class privilege side of things. But then you also have the issue of race. So trusteeship boards are traditionally white, male, middle class. So if you're coming in as a person of colour, chances are you're not really going to see anyone who looks like you, which makes it a little more challenging even to ask someone out to coffee, because then you start thinking, well, how are we really going to navigate this relationship? So we say this and it sounds really easy to ask someone out to coffee, but it just depends on your starting position. And again, same thing with women. Women are generally underrepresented on boards as well. So it's just trying to navigate those barriers. And one thing that I always say to the young women that come through the Beyond Suffrage program is try and occupy these spaces. No matter how uncomfortable it is, just put yourself out there and be the first if you need to be, because then a generation will come behind you.
You walk so others can run, I suppose, is the sort of general consensus. How do you, and this is drifting ever so slightly, but it does relate to some of the other conversations that we've had in this sort of format before with other guests, but how would you, or what would you say to a young person who's been appointed as a trustee because of the skill set that they offer, but in the boardroom, they've been told to sort of shepherd and look after whatever protected characteristic they have? So, you know, if you have a young black male there and the board are constantly just asking about experiences as a young black man rather than about whatever skill set it is that person's been recruited for, what would be your tips to those people?
It's really hard. That's always going to be a challenge. But what I would say is that if you don't call it out, it will keep happening. So there's got to be a point where you sort of speak up. What that looks like will depend on who you are, how comfortable you are, and what the issue is. It could well be that you can just raise it with a chair. So one-on-one, you don't have to do it face-to-face. It could be an email if that's something that's a bit more comfortable for you. But I would say that the best thing is always to address the issue. Because if you don't, you will always be the quote unquote black trustee or the working class trustee or the disabled trustee, whatever it may be, you're sort of grappling with on your board. it will just keep going on if you don't address it.
And class is really interesting because I'm from a working class background. Well, actually, my parents were unemployed for the bulk of my kind of teenage life because they were alcoholics. So make from that what you will. I don't know what the category is if you're working class without any work in the household. But when I've definitely moved up, right? I've got a degree. I've bought this flat that I live in. So I'm very aware now that I've progressed into the middle class. How do you think we secure working class voices in the boardroom? Do you think it's about just recruiting that kind of individual who is working class, or is it still valid to have been working class and to have had a set of experiences that have moved you slightly? Because that's something I really, really struggle with. Like, and also I don't want to be the person banging on about growing up in Grimsby. I haven't lived there for 10 years. So, you know, in 8 more years, I would have lived away longer than I lived there. So there's something there. I'm not sure I'm articulating it as well as I perhaps could, but hopefully you get what I mean. You've got some
I do. I really do. And class tends to be a really tricky one because of most of the protected characteristics, it's not really protected characteristics, but in terms of underrepresentation, it's one where you can sort of move away from. So you can't say that I used to be black and I'm no longer black. Whereas with class, you can sort of go working class and effectively, like you said, become middle class. But then that doesn't take away your working class roots because you know what it's like to grow up working class. So I do think that we definitely need to secure working class in terms of board representation. What that looks like depends on the individual board. So I think sometimes we sort of look for a one-size-fits-all approach or an answer for every single thing. I think every single board needs to just take stock and really think about what are we looking for. If we're looking for youth representation and we're thinking about young people from working class backgrounds, then maybe it just makes sense to take on board someone who's currently working class and going through those issues. But yeah, it always is complicated, and that's probably why we haven't fixed it just yet, because these are really difficult conversations and difficult things to address.
And especially in this country, talking about class, it's like impossible, right? And I noticed that with some, and we will get back to mentoring in a minute, but I think people are liking this. I'm going to carry on with it a bit. But there's something here about increasingly boards are talking about the role of trustees in fundraising. And I don't mean putting on an event, but I mean actually giving. And often when you're 18, 19, even into your mid-20s, you're on a board, you're usually the poorest person on the board, typically. Now, again, there are some exceptions to that. I mean, they're not in my friendship circle, people that are rich at the age of 22, but they do exist, right? So what do you think, because that obviously has an impact on accessibility to boards, what's your general feeling around that sort of thinking around all of that?
I think that's actually quite problematic. And I think we had a conversation about this the other day. It can be quite problematic because it will leave people out. So if we're saying we want more people, more diversity in the sector, when we start asking people to bring money into the charity as individuals, people from working class backgrounds will be left out, as will younger people, and a good chunk of ethnic minorities as well, because you've got that intersection of race and class that we don't always think about too much. But all these individuals will effectively be pushed out. We'll also push out women who've got caring responsibilities. So we'll end up with this really, really small group of individuals who will be able to become trustees. And I don't think that's the best direction to be sort of moving in as a sector as a whole. And the other thing would be little things like paying expenses. So if you're not claiming your expenses, then someone who needs to claim their expenses becomes the only person who's coming forward and asking for expenses claims. So it's those little things that make the world of a difference. If everyone claims back their expenses, and then if you need to, you can donate the money to the charity and gift aid it, that would be a better strategy, because that way people from working class backgrounds or younger people, anyone who needs the finances a bit more, can then be included without feeling like they're the only ones who are asking for expenses payback.
Yeah, I think that's all great advice. I'm going to bring Megan in a moment, and I guess my plea here to anyone watching this who is in a position of power, i.e. as a chair, chief executive, deputy chair, treasurer, whatever role, is that actually in your expenses policy to include things like widen participation beyond travel expenses? Because you mentioned, just parents there, and the associated childcare costs. I guess coronavirus has probably shifted our thinking a little bit in how boards can operate, as in it's forced lots of us online and realised that you can be giving a live interview on BBC whilst the child runs in and asks for 2 biscuits, like happened yesterday, right? And that's just part of life. But I'm going to ask Meg to bring in her question, which I think might get us back on the main topic. So Meg, over to you.
Hi, yeah, and thank you both so much to what you've contributed so far. I actually just had a question when I was thinking through, so I've not had a mentor before, but it's something that I would really like to have an experience. And if I was going into my first meeting with my mentor, I wouldn't know what to expect or what to prepare. So should I, for example, think about all my questions before, and kind of secondary to that, what can I ask of my mentor? I wouldn't want to take too much of their time. So how do I navigate kind of being respectful of their time and making the most of it? So I guess there's 2 questions there, really about mentee etiquette, I guess.
That's a really good question. What we did with the Beyond Suffrage cohort quite early on was something called a SWOT analysis. I don't know if you've heard before. So your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and barriers. So thinking about that before you start your trusteeship journey, really thinking about what do I want to get out of this, so that when you have your first meeting with your mentor, you know what it is that you're looking to get from the relationship with the mentor as well. And then also setting objectives. So if you could set like 3 or 4 objectives that you want to aim for, and then when you meet with your mentor, you can then go through them together. That way you can help continue the conversation when you meet again, and you've got something that you're working towards, something that's quite concrete. And that way you can sort of honor their time as well, because you'll definitely be prepared for the session.
Great. And if you, how do you manage, if you and your mentor feel like you're getting on when you're having coffee, great. What happens then in the boardroom if there is quite a severe clash of either personalities or values over something that the charity wants to do? So how do you manage a mentorship, a mentoring relationship that's gone wrong? Or do they go wrong? Have we ever experienced?
They do go wrong. That happens. It's a part of life, isn't it? I think it's always try and be professional with everything. So if you find that the mentorship is no longer working, you could both decide that it's not working and still have a working relationship in the boardroom. It's only a problem when it starts to get ugly. So that's one of the reasons why I don't advocate having a label, because then you could just have coffee less frequently, which is a code for this is probably not working, and that's perfectly fine, because you're not always going to be perfectly aligned in terms of your personalities. And when you start off, you might think that it's a good fit, and then you find out a couple of meetings down the line that it's not working, and that's perfectly fine.
Just phase it out gradually. See them.
Phase it out.
Yeah, okay, I like that. Okay, Amy has a question. She's messaged to say she's got a question. Amy, over to you.
Hi, so is it ever too late to have a mentor? So I've been a trustee for like 18 months, and just listening, I'm like, oh my goodness, this would be incredible. But like, has the time passed, or yeah?
There's no such thing. Yeah, whenever you feel like you need a mentor, that's probably a good time to sort of look into it. I think the only problem is when you're forced to have a mentor. So Leon mentioned this quite early on in the session, where you're told that you've joined the board, this is your mentor. That might not work. But yeah, there's no such thing as too late to have a mentor. Go for it.
Yeah. And if you love it, then offer yourself to be a mentor to other people as well when they join. What are your thoughts on reverse mentoring? So for those that, or my understanding of reverse mentoring, for those that might not understand it, is when the mentorship relationship is turned on its head. So a young person mentors a older person, or especially in current context, a person of colour mentors somebody that is white. What do you think it works? Do you have any advice around that sort of stuff? Because that's quite a powerful thing to do, I think, in academically, at least from my understanding. Does it work or not?
I'm not a big fan, if I must be honest. I think any form of mentoring should be two-way anyways. If you've got a mentoring scheme that's very one-way dominant, that's when you've got that dynamic that we just discussed where things go wrong and it can get very ugly, because you've got this power dynamic where we sort of esteeming the mentor over the mentee. But I think a good mentorship is one whereby the mentor is getting something out of the relationship, but so is the mentee. So it's almost like this, at the same time, mentoring, so reverse mentoring and forward mentoring at the same time. Whereas if it's reverse mentoring, particularly with people of colour, it can be fatiguing, because you're sort of going in there and you're reliving all your traumas and all your experiences, and you're effectively educating someone, but then it can take a toll on you.
I saw a chief executive of a large organisation the other day put on LinkedIn, a white male, although gay, chief exec, put on LinkedIn that one of the steps they wanted to take to learn about things was to have a black member of staff reverse mentor them. And I did think at first, I thought, oh, at first my instinct was, this is really good. Then as I've delved into Black Lives Matters, and I'm reading Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race as well.
Good book.
Which is a great book. And for any white people on the call, critical reading, I think, if you are also on a journey of education. And there was just, I guess now you've articulated that, there is something here about, I can't imagine how exhausting it must be to forever be teaching the people around you who make up the majority, i.e. white people, about your trauma and experience as a black person or a different person of colour. So I think that's really helpful to point out, because I think a lot of people think, and I certainly did before these last couple of weeks, think that reverse mentoring was a pretty good idea. Some of you on the call who are in their mid-20s might remember Takeover Days, which was something that ran, in the between 2000 and 2015 probably, where young people went in and took over an organisation for a day, and that was like youth participation. That was sort of it. So it's good to see we've moved some way on, but it does strike me that it kind of reflects on that a little bit. Now, I want to go back to people put themselves out there. If you reach out to someone and you don't hear back, how do you manage that situation? I guess in terms of resilience, because, no one likes to get rejected. How do you bounce back from that?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. No one likes to be rejected, but it's just a part of life. You will be rejected at some point in your life, more often than not, more than once. But it's just having that emotional resilience to understand that it's just a part of life. Go through the emotions. You're not a robot. It's perfectly fine to feel what you're feeling, to feel a little down, but then put yourself back in the game again. Just because one person does not want to be your mentor does not mean that you will never find a mentor again. So just put yourself out there again, ask someone else, and then just keep trying.
Keep going, even though it might dent your confidence a little bit. I'm going to invite Cassie, one of the other ambassadors, to just share experiences of allyship. So Cassie, over to you.
Hello. I'm really sorry I was late, by the way. I've had a bit of a day. I've had a mentor in a work capacity before, but I've never had one as part of my role as a trustee. But after this webinar, I feel like I need to go and get one. But I have had some really impactful allies along my journey, and I wouldn't necessarily have kind of identified them as mentors as such, because the relationship or the support they were giving wasn't as kind of long term. But yeah, I think Meg just wanted me to share some of those. And one thing I would say that I've learned anyway on my path to being a trustee is that it's okay to not find everything in one person. And so I've had like a few people, Bill isn't here, but he's one of the other ambassadors who I knew before Young Trustees Movement, and he would be kind of one of the allies that I'd met in like my working life. And actually he was the first person I called to chat about trusteeship, and just to kind of say, I've got this interview and I'm not really sure like the questions I need to ask. And so we had a phone call and we chatted through all of that. And so I think there's definitely value in finding those people in the movement. But also I found, and I'm really lucky because my work are amazing, but my manager has been a really good ally to me throughout the trustee journey. I work for a charity anyway, so you know, she kind of understands trusteeship, and she is the director of our charity. But I found it really powerful being able to have conversations about trusteeship in a work setting, to talk about how like what I'm learning from my trustee role can be applied to my day job, and vice versa. And also just having somebody to chat through like ideas or problems, someone that knows me really well, because I work with her every day. And so they were kind of two of the people that came up. But also my the chair of my board, while I've only been on my board since November, I think we're kind of gradually moving into that kind of mentor relationship, but in a more, I've never said to her, oh, do you want to be my mentor? But just the conversations have flown, and often she'll email to say, I just want to check that everything's okay, and you know, if there's anything I can help with. So I guess my experience is that I haven't had one person, but I've had a few people in different parts of my life that I've been able to get advice and mentorship from.
Cassie, is there any particular reason why you've not had a more formal mentorship? Because it's, I guess what I'm saying, there's quite a fine line between what you're describing and what Precious is describing. But is there any reason why you've either never sought to have one? Because that might be quite useful, because other people might have had those similar experiences.
I guess for me, as I said, I've had a mentor in a work capacity, and it really didn't work. I'm sure she won't watch this, but yeah, it didn't feel, and I'm not sure whether it was because of like this like situation, because we worked in the same organization and she was the senior manager, and so she was mentoring me in my role, and we just talked about work all the time, but in a way that was like, oh, have you seen the agenda for that meeting? Have you made sure you've done those actions? Or, oh, did you see the all staff update kind of thing, rather than me feeling like I had a space to explore and talk through kind of ideas that I need help with. And so I guess that kind of put me off, if I'm honest, because it just didn't really work, and it felt a bit forced.
You had your fingers burned, but has this last sort of 35 minutes, no, how long? Yeah, 35 minutes sort of re-inspired you to perhaps go out there and get one?
Yeah, I think so. I feel like, yeah, having someone outside of my own organisation as well is probably beneficial. I'm feeling very inspired after this chat anyway.
That's really good. What I would add though, sorry to cut you off, Liam, I would say that I think that you actually do have mentors.
Yeah.
And this sort of goes back to that fine line, because even what your chair is doing, she's effectively mentoring you. You don't have the label, and I'd say don't be in a hurry to stick a label on it, because that pressure sometimes is what creates the tension. So if you've got someone who's effectively acting as a mentor, the next step is to just add a bit of structure. Don't worry about the labels, that can just sort of be pushed to the side. But so long as you've got that structure in place, I think you're good to go. And thanks for sharing, by the way. That was brilliant.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Cassie. So if I'm in the board, well, I am in the boardroom, and I want to work out, I kind of think, you know, I've watched this and think, right, I want to mentor. What do I then do? What's the next step? Is there something in particular I should look for in a mentor? Is it someone with a similar skill set to me and similar background, or completely different? Or does all of that go out the window and it's just anyone that will spend half an hour with me in Pret whenever we're allowed to meet in Pret again?
I think the first thing is personality. So even if you've got the same skill set, if your personalities don't align, you will clash. And that's where you've got those tensions. So find someone that you can see yourself spending time with. You want it to be organic. You want it to be a relationship, and relationships take time. You need to invest in it. You're not going to have your first meeting and think, this is the most amazing thing ever. It takes time. So just find someone that you think, this is someone who's personable. This is someone that I can actually see myself having coffee with, and then go out for coffee and sort of take it from there.
Precious, I wondered if you would tell people a little bit about your professional background, which is quite different to most of the people that we've had sitting in the hot seat, if you like, because a lot of them are sort of the charity sector, if you like, as in their career and all their volunteering and whatnot. So can you just talk to us a bit about your background and how you ended up where you are? We should have done this at the start, actually, but it's kind of quite nice to always end on this as well, so people can understand the context that you're have been speaking at.
Yeah, so I'll actually start from the beginning because I've got an interesting journey. So I dropped out of school around my GCSEs, so I never was into school. I later did find out, much later, when I was about 23, that I was dyslexic. But one of the reasons why I could never engage at school was because of that. So I sort of dropped out of school around my GCSEs, and then I went back to school to do at college to do my GCSEs again. And that seemed to go really well because it was a totally different institution, less structured. I had a poor attendance rate because I sort of homeschooled myself. Ended up finishing my A-levels with A's, and then went on to university and graduated with a first-class honours degree in accounting and finance. So if you are dyslexic or anything like that, I'm another dyslexic out here. So went to university, studied accounting and finance. Afterwards, joined an accounting firm where I trained to be an auditor. And then I spent about 5-6 years in Birmingham working as an auditor, moved to London, continued in the accounting space. And then I sort of had an epiphany. I realized I really wanted to do more activism type work. So my family sort of hails from South Africa and Zimbabwe. They were very involved in the liberation struggle and apartheid South Africa. So I always wanted to be involved in the activism space. Took a career break, studied a master's in charity management, and then it was then that I had the idea to form a social enterprise that would marry my accounting skills and my love for activism. So now I run a not-for-profit accounting and consultancy social enterprise that's built on social justice principles, and it is the light of my life. I absolutely love the work that I do. And one of the programs, as I mentioned quite early on, that we run through the organisation is Beyond Suffrage, where we train young women of colour to be trustees on charity boards and effectively occupy spaces where they may not be invited naturally, but we effectively creating room and space for them. So that's a quick pit stop through my life.
Oh, someone's just commented. Uniqua, I hope I said your name correctly, said I did audit in Birmingham a few years ago too. There you are. So,
Fantastic.
Are you from Birmingham? Because you don't have a Brummie accent.
No, so I grew up in Kent.
Right.
I only moved to Birmingham when I went to university. So I went to university in Birmingham and then ended up staying on for work.
I see. I can hear the Kent now. You've said it because I was just trying to track the journey. So Beyond Suffrage, then. I think you did a little bit of a pitch there, but are the horror stories that we're reading about on social media for being a person of colour and particularly a woman of colour in a boardroom, is that changing, or are you still hearing sort of those horror stories as recent as, I don't know, a couple of months ago last year?
Unfortunately, the horror stories are still very much true. We are making progress, but it's really slow. It won't change until we change the makeup of boards. So we were talking about how boards are traditionally white, male, middle class, and a lot older. So if you're coming into the space as a woman of colour, you are confronted with this notion that you have to sort of fit in. You have to fit the mold, or you're effectively pushed out. And that's information that we often hear from the charity sector in general. So it hasn't quite changed. I don't think we're on the cusp of change just yet, but I think we're making progress, and hopefully we'll continue to make progress over the coming years.
If there are people watching this, and I work for a charity in my day job as well, who are thinking the sector bangs on about how it values people and that people are at the centre of what it does, and that, you know, we love the communities we work in and everyone that we serve and all the rest of it. But the Charity So White campaign has highlighted all of, or some of the race issues out there. For people that are watching this and thinking, I want to be a trustee of a charity, I'm going to get a mentor, I'm going to do all those things, but there seems to be at the moment a weird values clash between wanting to do that and give back into a sector that is potentially going to discriminate against me because of who I am and my background. How do you circle that square?
I think the most important thing is don't be pushed out. So I always say this to young people, you have to occupy spaces. We talk about racism in the charity sector, but it's not isolated. It's not just racism in the charity sector. There's racism in the NHS. If you look at maternity statistics for women of colour, racism in policing, racism in the private sector. So it's just an issue in society in general. So don't let it stop you. Don't decide not to be a trustee on account of race. There will be barriers, there will be obstacles, but whatever you can do, just do that. And there are programs, there's a lot more going on. Malcolm John's got work that he's doing, trying to bring more people into sector. We've got Beyond Suffrage, we're trying to make as much noise as possible. You mentioned Charity So White. There's work that's happening, but then we need people to show up and we need people to really occupy these spaces, because no one's in a hurry to bring you in. You sort of have to force your way in and create your seat for yourself at the table.
And I think that is a brilliant point to end on. We've got 2 minutes left, but I want to tell people about next week as well before I thank you for that really insightful and thorough and a bit jumpy all over the subject, which is my fault, but there was just so many things that you said that I wanted to pull out. So I hope everyone found that useful. The next session next week is getting your board on board, and Bill, who Cassie mentioned earlier, who's one of the young trustee ambassadors and is a recruiter in his day job for Peridot Partners, is going to be with us, along with the head of governance, Alison from the NSPCC. And the reason that Alison is joining us is because the NSPCC recently put out an advert for a trustee who is under 25. So specifically, they are looking for someone between 18 to 25. And for the NSPCC, you know, one of the top, I don't know, 50 charities, whatever, in the country, to come on this journey for young trustees is a real critical win, not just for the movement and for the people they've had conversations with, but inevitably for the young people that the NSPCC serve. So if you're interested in that, come and join us next week. It's going to be the same time, same place. We're going to continue with the weekly ones for the next 4 weeks. And then from August, we're going to change the timing of these and do them, I think it's once a month. So there'll be a lot less intense commitment in terms of something weekly. But Precious, that, honestly, I really enjoyed this evening. Thank you so much for spending 45 minutes with us. We will make sure that we share all of your social media handles and whatnot so people can reach out to you. Is there anything you want to say in the last sort of 30 seconds that I haven't given you the opportunity to say yet?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this, taking part in this session, and thanks to everyone who sort of dialed in. One last thing to say, go and occupy those spaces. Don't let anyone put you down for being a young trustee. Show up. That's the only way that we can sort of try to change in a meaningful way.
That's great. Thanks very much. Thank you, everybody, and have a nice evening.